Welcome, everybody. It's really great to see everybody. My name is Jo Delamore, and I represent the Work That Reconnects Network. And I want to thank you for joining us for this webinars and Conversation Cafe series, where we're offering a really wide range of rich and educational and supportive opportunities for our global community of Work That Reconnects facilitators, members, and friends of the network. Our intention with this program is to strengthen the web of connection within the Work That Reconnects community while continually reaching beyond our current edges to weave deeper connections with others who are contributing to the great turning in diverse and complementary ways. So today I'm really excited and really deeply honored to welcome Dr. Bayo Akomolafe to speak with us about post-activism, transraciality, and decoloniality. He's a world-renowned speaker, author, public intellectual, and one of the most radical and insightful thinkers of our times, always bringing our attention to the ways our living reality continually spills beyond the edges of our neatly arranged definitions. He is the visionary founder of the Emergence Network and host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains. And he's also the loving father to Alethea and Kaya and the grateful life partner to EJ. And all of that and much more we welcome to this webinar. Welcome, Bayo.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me, dear Sister Jo.
It's so great to be here and to get into all of this. Before we dive in to all that we're going to explore, I just want to give a super quick overview of what we'll do together today. So we've got a conversation ahead of us. Bayo and I are going to discuss these topics for a little while. Then we're going to take a short break so that you can just kind of stretch and take care of your physical needs. And then after the break, we'll open it up for questions and comments and kind of whole group discussion with anybody who wants to participate in that. So as we're talking, if things are arising for you, you can jot them down, think what do you really want to get into in that question and answer comment discussion time. You'll be invited to either raise your hand or put stuff in the chat, so you can feel free to type questions or thoughts into the chat. And Sylvia, who is here with us for tech support, Sylvia, you want to wave?
Yeah, I think your spotlight, but yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Sylvia's with us for tech support, so she'll be kind of gathering those questions and or available if you have any tech needs. You can directly chat to her. Excellent. So let's just take a moment of presencing, connecting in with where we are on the earth and where we are in our bodies, in our local areas on the planet. So I invite you to take just a couple deep breaths. To tune into the living presence of your body. And then a couple deep breaths to tune into the living presence of the living world around you. Plants and the animals, the ground, the ecosystem that holds you and nourishes you. And then take a couple deep breaths, tuning into the interconnected relationships between each of these ecosystems around the planet. There's almost 200 people on the call right now, and we're coming in from many, many, many different places across the face and the body of our living earth. So just see if you can feel that kind of translocal community. We're not floating in a nowhere place, we're in an everywhere place. We're in an interconnected place with all the real places that we're in connected with each other. And while we're here in this spot, I would just like to acknowledge our deep indebtedness and our gratitude for all that supports us, all the conspiracies of forces and beings that make it possible for us to be here together today in all of the grief and all of the gratitude that brings. So, as we tend to do in the Work That Reconnects communities, we can begin with gratitude. So, Bayo, I would love to hear something simple, real, present that is blessing your life today. Just share a little bit of where you're coming from, gratitude in this moment.
I am so grateful. What comes to mind right now is my dear family. They're my sacred enablement and agency, and also my sacred limitation. Right? um, they, I just came off a call with my daughter, who was staring weirdly in the phone and making faces, and I just felt the joy of her gift. Um, she blessed me and allowed me to be here, and I'm thankful for that. I'm in Chennai, in South India, um, with my dear people. And there is a sense these days in which our boundaries are also traveling and migrating, so that I can say that you are my people as well. And I can recognize some of us here. So I'm thankful for you too. I'm thankful for how our lives are crisscrossing and how we're being convened for the next. This is my point of gratitude. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Beautiful. Beautiful. So we are going to get into some of the concepts and the new words that you've created and, and things that you like to explore and talk about. And the first one is around post-activism. And so the
Joe,
work, what's that?
Joe, before we go there,
Yeah.
can we just libate the grounds? This is
Yes,
just
yes.
something that is really comes from my, is a way of also offering gratitude. Can we break the power dynamics just a little bit and allow everyone to unmute themselves? And let's greet each other.
Good morning.
If
Good
Yes,
morning,
good
everyone.
morning.
Hi,
Hello, Bayo.
good
Morning.
morning.
Thank you
Oh,
for that.
Yes, everyone.
oh,
Bayo,
To everybody.
loving.
nice
Bayo.
Gratitude.
We are
So
here
many
together for
people.
that.
Hi.
Thank
Wonderful
you. Thank
idea.
this is always the best part.
I know.
Thank
Bio,
you.
harmony and
Thank
cohesion,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Bio. That's good. I was feeling like, oh, there's something that
That's
we
missing,
needed
right?
a little shake up. Thanks for doing that. Perfect. Okay. So I'm sure that there's a lot of folks on the call who are part of the Work That Reconnects community and know about the Work That Reconnects, but I'm sure there's also some folks who don't. Maybe they came through other channels. But just because we're kind of hosting this from the Work That Reconnects Network and in the context of the Work That Reconnects community, we're going to be like weaving these concepts into and exploring them through the lens of Work That Reconnects to some extent. So if you aren't already familiar with it, I invite you to just kind of, roll along and then maybe go explore a little bit after the webinar to learn more if your interest is piqued. But the Work That Reconnects being a body of work that has emerged and evolved over the past 40 years or so, largely from the work of the root teacher Joanna Macy, but in collaboration with her colleagues all over the decades, and now a very living body of work that is continually deepening and stretching but its very first origin was as a tool for activists. And so we're going to be kind of exploring post-activism here, as the work that reconnects is really used by and geared towards activists in a lot of ways. So our community being made up of people who, largely of people who care about the world, recognize the social and environmental crises that we're facing, and are really moved to act in some way to protect and care for life, and identify as activists in one way or another. And this work having emerged from the anti-nuclear activist groups that were experiencing burnout and despair, it really has emerged as a tool for activists to kind of maintain connection, wellness, and their commitment. But Bayo, your inquiry into post-activism really challenges a lot of the conventional notions of activism by asking the question, what do we do when our response to the crisis becomes part of the crisis? Or what do we do when agency is broken?
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit about how traditional forms of activism could become part of the crisis, and how we find ourselves in that predicament? Like, how does that even come to be?
Right. One of the central and persistently resonant figures in my thinking, and it's not my thinking per se, it's a field of play, and I'm stuck in that playground for now. One of those figures is the slave ship, and I am used to saying that we didn't quite disembark, right? That a slave ship, or rather, the slave ship didn't disappear. It didn't vanish into nothingness. It arrived, so to speak, and became the shore, right? And transmuted into the systems that we now see as our familiar today, right? And I think that hidden and largely invisible political constituency, which is the slave ship, is a beautiful and simultaneously tragic way of understanding agency today, especially agency in modern civilization. And I'll speak about that for a bit and try to chart out where post-activism emerges from, right? So imagine that, well, it's patently unimaginable, it's unthinkable, right? But if you can, imagine being on a slave ship. I'll describe some of the conditions. It's being squeezed into allocated spaces. It's the funk and the stink of rotting bodies. It's the toss and toil of the ocean. And there's no hope in sight. You've been stolen from your lands. You've been stolen from your people. And with every inch traversed, you're taken away from the ones that you know and the ones that you love. And then a storm gathers. And the storm is such that the captain of the ship is afraid, he's wary, and he announces all hands on deck, because suddenly there's a break in the hull of the ship, and the ship is threatened by this storm, and it might sink to the bottom of the ocean. And so the captain wants everyone on the ship to do their best to patch up this break, this crack in the body of the ship. That's almost like, in my view, description of the Anthropocene. It's a description of our present circumstances, that there is a sense in which we're being galvanized and convened to save the world, to do something about the climate chaos crisis, to address ecological devastation and ocean acidification. And we're being called to do this, to get things back to normal. Think about the pandemic and the call to return things to normal, right? Of course, the fact here is that normal wasn't working. Normal has always been deeply terrifying and oppressive. Now think about those slaves on aboard this hypothetical ship. You know, they're faced with continuity, which is troubling, or discontinuity, which is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. What do you do when the binary presents no real choice, no real solutions, when you're stuck between a binary that is killing and destructive, whichever way you turn? I feel that kind of describes politics today. It's like we're stuck between the left and the right, and we're losing our sense of being at home. There's a sense in which the movement, there's a ground movement, a ground shift, and the political homes that we've built and territorialized and cherished and decorated for so long no longer meet our desires for what a world could look like, for what it means to be at home with our children, with food, with taste, with community. And so we're stuck, right? We're stuck in this assemblage of capture and of power. But the point of post-activism is to present a third challenge, the trickster's invitation, so to speak. And you might call it a third way. It's at that moment when something breaks through and then something else there's a gravitational pull. Maybe a slave is listening to the cracks and senses a goddess. Maybe Yemoja, one of the Orishas in the Yoruba pantheon, maybe another god is calling through the cracks and saying, come hither, there's something else to do. So in that scenario, and largely in ours, post-activism is the site of despair, is the site of gravity, is the site where something outside of our binarizing, stultifying, exhausting politics transversely breaks through and invites a new way to respond or be in response with a world that is larger, keener, agential, and more alive than we've given it credit for, right? Post-activism is, and I'm usually very shy about speaking about post-activism as if it were a thing. It's a moving target, it's fugitive. So I don't like to define it, but for the sake of our conversation, I would say post-activism is a framework of responsivity or being in response in times of collapse, in times of demise. This is where we notice the trickster. This is where we tell stories about tricksters aboard slave ships, right? And that there's always something else in those moments of oppressive, stultifying poverty, when it seems there's nothing else to do. There's a trickster. There's a molecular being that is near, to our action that might invite us to do something different. Let me say something else about contemporary activism. I've often said as well, using that framework of the slave ship, that it seems that our actions are like moving ships, moving seats on a ship or on the Titanic or something. It's like I've said elsewhere, that it's like installing solar panels on a slave ship, right? It's like doing breath work on a slave ship or doing yoga on a slave ship and wanting to center oneself on a slave ship. You're still on a damn slave ship. And the conditions of our oppression and the conditions of our incarceration still steal into our bodies and capture what is possible. So this is the time when we need a break, when we need cracks, when we need openings that are not of our own doing, but our spiritual, archetypal movements, ancestral movements, breaking open the container of responsibility and inviting new ways of sensing and thinking with the world. This is in a nutshell, and I don't like nutshells, but this is in a nutshell, the invitation of post-activism.
Excellent. I'm hearing something in this that is akin to, in our systems thinking, living systems view and study around crisis and emergence, and that
Right.
when a system gets to that crisis point, there's a possibility of emergence that is completely unpredictable, especially in
Mm,
complex systems. We don't know what may emerge, but there's that other way, the beyond the container of the previously
yes.
refined system.
Yes. Yes. I mean, this is what systems theory, as useful as it is, cannot comprehend. That systems are, by definition, languaged realities. We language them into being. They're intelligible to us. That's why they're systemic. But every system is indebted to the asystemic, right? Something outside of the languageable or the sensible or meaning-making practices of our time is responsible and is part of the conditions for what we rudely call systems. And we need that liminality for novelty to appear, right? So as an African, I'm acutely aware of benevolent attempts to save us, right? We're the recipients of such multiple attempts, to craft and articulate intelligible approaches. But sometimes they're indebted, they're still weaved and convened within the epistemology, the knowledge-making systems, the collective awareness systems that gave birth to our crisis in the first place. So
Yeah.
this is why we need something transversal, something cross-cutting, like Oumuamua, that visitor into our galaxy that only came with some kind of parabolic shift
I'm
and
not
moved out of the
I'm not familiar with
Oumuamua.
what you're referencing. Can you explain?
I'm going into extraterrestrial
Okay.
stuff now. It shouldn't go there, but it's I think this happened prior to the pandemic. Or during, I think it was prior to the pandemic. I think it would have been too much for us to take during the pandemic. It was this cosmic object that was curiously shaped, unlike any other asteroid. And it came into our galaxy and just zoomed out, just in and out. And it dumbfounded everyone because that's not how these objects behave, especially how they're shaped. So many respectable people spoke about it as sentient or some kind of, but whatever it wasn't reducible to our systems. That's what I'm
Right.
trying to say. And there's something outside of systemic thinking that isn't reducible to our sense-making rituals. And that's where the trickster lives. And that's where post-activism emerges from. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So this ties back into something that I've heard you share before around what the predominant paradigm does to our thinking and our approach in
Yeah.
making the real forces or the beyond the system forces invisible, and premising all of our framework on rationality, free will, individualism,
Mm-hmm.
separation, linear time,
Mm-hmm.
the things that we in general wind up taking for granted, and then premising our work on that. So this
Yeah.
goes back into that whole Western world conventional activism saving or planning on saving African communities, and it coming from a very particular
Yes.
mindset. So you want to talk a little
Yes.
bit about how that predominant paradigm affects the choices we're making?
Of course, it is. Of course, this is something that is increasingly popular to say and to think about. And it emerges from a matrix of converging disciplines like material eco-criticism, material feminisms, indigenous studies, Black studies, and even quantum physics, there is a sense in which we are noticing that we are not the lords of the realms, right? We are not superior to a multi-species Salon. We are not above the realm. We are part of how the world comes to be. To put it in terms that might be more poetic than my ramblings here, if anyone knows Chinua Achebe here, I would invite you to please, if you haven't read him, please get his Things Fall Apart or any other book that he's written. Foremost African novelist. In one of his novels, I think Arrow of God, I think it's called, he writes these lines, in response to Archimedes, who says, give me a place to stand, and I shall move the world, right? I shall move things. And he responds in this very, very elderly African grandfatherly way, saying that, but there is no place to stand. We all stand with the world and we must move at its pace, right? And that idea of moving at the world's pace is slowly but surely becoming a paradigm of concern and of weighty premises today. So we are realizing we're not separate or separable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is giving birth to new ideas of what agency is. What if agency is not a property of the body, right? What if agency is territorial, maybe even atmospheric, in how it enlists bodies and how it enlists things to do things? Think about the virus. The virus did what no human leader could have done or could do, right? Obama couldn't send people to their homes or ground planes in their airports. He couldn't shut down the economy. No one could do that. A virus, infinitesimally small, vanishingly small, stole like a stowaway into our economies and upset the established order. This was a non-human entity, right? So we're starting to come to terms with how we have and always have been in the middle. We've never left the middle. We're not at the end or the beginning. We are part of a rich tapestry of becoming. And I'm not sure what the question was again. I've traced stuff into my could you remind me of what I was supposed to respond to?
Yeah, no, it was perfect because we're starting from this like premising our thinking on these separate individualists,
Yes, I
right?
remember.
But then you really moved into this whole breaking the subject and getting into
Yes.
that ecological self of being like embedded deeply in a living world. And
Yes.
this is actually something that John Seed and other people within the Work That Reconnects movement speak of.
Yeah.
There's a story that Joanna tells about, and I think it was John, about him having a realization as he was defending the rainforest that it was
Mhm.
actually the rainforest defending itself through him, that he became
Yes.
an agent of. And
Yes.
so that I understand from what you're saying that can happen without us even being involved. Other
Yes.
non-human agency is happening all the time, but it also can involve us in some ways, and we can
Yes.
become
Yeah.
agents of. Yeah.
I mean, this is like, I don't want to tell the story about my daughter shushing me when she was 2 years old in Richmond, Virginia, and that being one of the most profound experiences of my life. But yes, maybe I should tell the story. Well,
I guess
many
so.
many of my friends here have heard it, but I'll just go ahead with it. I woke up one day with a curious experiment. I've never done that experiment ever since. It was the one time I did it. It lasts a lifetime. And this is a buyer beware. Don't try this at home if you cannot deal with a toddler. Well, I woke up in the morning and I said that, I'm going to say yes to everything my 2-year-old said. Like she says, Dada, jump 3 times or whatever. I was expecting cute stuff, but I said, I'm going to say yes to anything she says. And then she's a very trickstery person as well. And she was like, okay, so let's go swim. And I'm like, okay. I said, yes, let's try this. Now I cannot swim to save my life. I happen to be the stereotypic embodiment of that idea that Black people can't swim. And I know it's of course a stereotype, but I happen to represent that cross section that really cannot swim to save my life and also likes fried chicken. So my daughter drags me to the swimming pool, except we're not heading to the swimming pool, Joe. We're heading to the lake. Now I'm trying to draw her attention to the fact that you've missed your way, and this right here is a swimming pool. It's safe, we can wade, and there's someone to help us if I drown or if you drown. But she insists that what she's pointing at, which is natural and of course, without easy boundaries, is where we're supposed to be heading to. And so we go there. On the way, she's milking the whole experiment and she's saying, remove your slippers, wear mine, I'll wear yours. And it's becoming really awkward. People are looking at us and I'm getting worried. But we get to the lake by and by and we just keep quiet and she's just still in this shocking way. And I start to feel the awkwardness of the moment. And I want to interject with some fatherly wisdoms, some stories about her multiracial legacies. She's from India and she's from Nigeria, the Yoruba people. She's also from the Igbo people in Eastern Nigeria. I just wanted to bond with my daughter in that moment. And as I started to speak, she said, shh, listen. And I listen. Of course, there's nothing apparent. There's nothing noteworthy in the moment, but I keep quiet. And that moment changes me. There's no way for me to express what occurred or what happened, except to say that I was immediately haunted by the animacy of the world around me. Everything just came to this, just jumped to high definition color, as if I was having a psychedelic experience, right? Without the ayahuasca or without the iboga. It just came to life. An ant scurrying through the grass, the ducks quacking, wind rushing through the leaves. It's like the world was doing something and it didn't depend on my agency. Or rather, agency became something that I was enlisted into instead of something that I can own as a property, right? Mm-hmm. And so that story I often use to signal the place where the world kicks back, right? That we have embarked upon a humanist journey, at least within modern civilization, speculatively, that has taken us on the straight and narrow. It's a very humanist liberal tradition to believe that we embody agency, we embody free will. If we don't do anything about our circumstances, we're undone. If we don't save the world is unsaved. That we study the planet. The planet doesn't look back at us. So the most scandalizing thing for our time is when the world looks back, when we're met with something that exceeds us, right? And I think that's the point at which we're suddenly met with a question that is too powerful, too heavy for one person to hold. It's like, so what do we do with agency? What do we do with ourselves, right? If the dolphin that I thought I was studying is suddenly, the researcher, and I'm part of this cetacean research project, right? Then where do I go? What do I do with this moment? This is the scandal of modern civilization. But let me say something else to that. You said something about where our activism spring from. And I want to use the words of, or the phrase of my dear sister, Erin Manning, what she calls the clearing, right? The work of modernizing the world is about flattening it so that it fits the perspectival and socio-material frames of the individual, right? It might be helpful to say a thing or two about the Norse mythology of Frigga, right? Frigga has a son called Baldur, son of Odin, and a prophecy is received that Baldur will die. And Frigga does the very thing that I expect, you would expect mothers to do. She travels the length and breadth of all the universes and extracts from every living and non-living thing a promise that they would not harm her son. She extracts it from them and basically says, make sure you don't harm my son. She speaks to lion and sun and aliens and spaceships and water and teardrops and everything. And she successfully tames the world, except one thing, which is the mistletoe. And Loki, the trickster, upon hearing that the mistletoe has not been consulted, fashions a weapon from the mistletoe and hands it to a god who is playing tricks with Baldur in heaven. And with that plaything, with that weapon, kills Baldur, right? So there is a sense in which modernity is imperviousness to the wild that has always been the condition of our becoming. It is a flattening of worlds to make room for the self. The self is the heaviest thing on earth, the self, the human self, because of what the assumptions that we pack into it, right? So it is from this place, from this clearing, from this flattening that we enact structures of redemption, only to find that they collapse back into the epistemology that sponsored them. Let me keep quiet for now.
Okay. Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that, I mean, you just said a lot more here in this story of Baldur, but kind of reaching back to the story with Alethea at the lake and the wisdom
Yeah.
of that precious moment of the living world speaking. And I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like that really roots that post-activism is, you know, where it beyond the human, beyond like
Yes.
allowing ourselves to break the subject and break the sense of
Yes.
self and separation, and
Yes.
seeing what comes from listening, you know,
Yes.
what comes, what we're led to. Beautiful. Okay, so from all of that framework there, and then journeying into this, these deeper, or maybe more specific threads of transraciality and decoloniality, you spoke to that to some extent at the beginning, as you started to tell the story of the slave ship and the shore becoming, or the slave ship becoming the shore. But I want to go a little deeper into those concepts and your thinking on that. So we recognize, I would say, in the Work That Reconnects community, we're very aware that racism and colonization have been and continue to be two of the most harmful and destructive forces of what we call the industrial growth society. It's the kind of Work That Reconnects term for the predominant society. And where many of us are really called to address that, and sometimes coming from that activist, you know, agential, what do you call it, movement. So can you help us weave these concepts of post-activism into how transraciality and decoloniality can be pathways, or are pathways, that are aligned with post-activism and can guide us in courageously, authentically responding to harm and injustice, without replicating power, you know, systems of oppressions and hierarchies of power.
Okay. The juicy stuff. So I often speak about Blackness in two senses. I speak about Blackness with a big B, I call it. This is Blackness as identity. This is Blackness as a passenger of white real estate, right? It's identitarian. It's a struggle for recognition. It is noticeable within a politics of representation. it's part of the clearing. And its algorithm is to seek justice, but justice that can only be given by the nation state, right? Which is curiously another enactment of the clearing, right? Of this refusal to die, of this refusal to see ourselves as part of the world in its worldly becomings. There's another sense in which I speak about Blackness, and it's connected to the works of Sylvia Wynter, Saidiya Hartman, Fred Moulton, C.L.R. James, Chinua Achebe, African scholars, right? And this Blackness with a small b is a counter-hegemonic force. It's not an identity. It's not a property of any body, right? Bodies cannot be Black in this way, right? It is atmospheric. It is tentacular. It's a field, right? But if I were to give it one conversational title, I would say Blackness is refusal, right? It is the refusal of objects to fit within their objectification, right? So it's I spoke about dolphins, right? I spoke about the world breathing and expanding beyond its natural resource designation, right? Mm-hmm. And that is refusal. When things spill away from their containment, that almost mimics the historicity, the agency, the experience, but yet even more the sublimation that is Blackness, right? It's from this place that I would say this, that it may be quite controversial. But before I get to it, let me lay some building blocks and offer some more libation, right? And your question, sister, is how do we think transraciality, which is a concept that I formulated, in an attempt to decentralize human beings and human identities in a world that exceeds those things? And how do we think it through decoloniality and post-activism? Let me offer an idea of decoloniality. And the decolonial is a very popular term. Everyone is decolonizing something. I heard some people are decolonizing decolonization now. So we're back to where we started. So it's all over again. Mm-hmm. But decoloniality is the point at which something moves. It is the refusal to stabilize what coloniality stabilizes, right? Mm-hmm. Decoloniality sees with the eye of the Afro-scene, right? It sees movement where the colonial sees stability. Decoloniality is ecstasy. Really, the etymological root of ecstasy is to be beside oneself, right? Mm. It is a processual, relational, vibrant, carnivalesque, festive way of being in the world that notices that nothing is quite itself. Even a slave ship is not fully itself. Nothing is totally itself. It always is indebted to something else, right? The myth of the modern is that we are atomic, Newtonian, Cartesian, self-evident entities unto ourselves. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we clear a forest and we clear a bush and we clear everything and we plant permanent phallic structures and we call them cities. And then we tell ourselves we're immune to everything else around us. We're immune to viruses. We're immune to grief. We're immune to the world and its movements. And then we rationalize, we build gilded, gentrified environments that look like us. Mm-hmm. But the story of our times is that we've never really been human in that way. We've always been part of the world, but I digress again. So when we start to see decoloniality as ecstasy, right, then we come to the problem of race. When we speak about race, there are popular ways of speaking about it is, one, it is a social construction. So it's not real. That's an unfortunate term. that social constructionism means not real, but that's another conversation. So they say it's not real. There's no science to that effect, and so it's not real. And there's another one, which is the more pernicious attempt at saying that there literally is some biological and empirical evidence, and this might be promulgated by Fox News or something, that white identified bodies are superior to Black and other minorities, right? Both ideas are problematic, deeply troubling. So I would never say that race is a social construction. That means we basically made it and we can switch it off if we want to, right? Because that's the implication, that if we in our languaging and our sociality invented the concept of race, then we can summarily, by legislation or by policy or by some Obama picture, turn off racism, or by training, turn off, or turn on racial justice. We can do it. Race is within our agency to control because it's not real. I don't think race is a social construction. I think it's a social production. And by social production, I mean race is not a property of bodies. Race is a field of acting that convenes bodies in how they come to matter, sometimes in exclusive ways to the exclusion of other bodies, and sometimes in ways that are available for other kinds of agency in the world, right? So I don't have race. Race has me. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? That racial becomings and racialization is a trope. It's a field of acting, right? It's not stable as an identity. It's too dynamic to be embodied by any one being or any one entity. So when we start to see race from the perspective not of citizen subjects that are intelligible to the nation state, but from the perspective of movement, and that is what decoloniality is saying that we are, Joe. I am a movement. I am migrancy. I am murmuration, right? I am bird, I am stone, I am rock, I'm moving, right? This is not to dismiss that I'm a Black man sitting in front of you, but that's a humanist constraint. Right. To stretch the perspectives and the framework of our scene is to notice that I'm a Black man, but I'm also becoming, right? I am local, but I'm also diasporic. Can we hold the tensions of these, definitions at the same time, right? Transraciality is the view from movement, is the animist take, the post-humanist take on race, right? It's a refusal to stabilize race in the body or in the entity, right? And what does that translate to? It means that racial justice may not be enough, because racial justice is a creature and a secretion of the very conditions that gave birth to racism. Racism is not something that one person has. In my view, there is no racist. Don't say that. And this is what I mean by that. I don't mean to say that there aren't people that are enlisted into having biases and weaponized feelings against other people. No, that's not what I'm saying. There are, definitely. But I'm saying the racist is not the individual. We're so used to thinking in terms of atomic individuals. And this is why our politics is very atomic. It's like, you're the bad guy. No, you are the bad guy. Let's get rid of you. Let's get rid of you, right? It's so myopic. It's stuck on the individual, which is another reiteration of colonial settlement, right? Yeah. So Fred Moulton put it in this beautiful way. I think I'm riffing here. I don't even know where I am anymore, but but Fred Moulton said this, beautiful. He said, the first vessel of capture wasn't the slave ship. It was the human individual. It was flesh reconceptualized, right? So capitalism, modern civilization is the attempt to take desire, affect, agency is an attempt to direct all these more than human elements and forces by way of the individual. And this is where we're stuck. This is why our politics keeps rotating traumatically around what we do with the individual. Even with our best intentions, when we're online, it feels like cancel culture. When we're offline, it feels like anger towards anyone that doesn't look like us, because we're stuck on the individual, right? Mm-hmm. Transraciality says we don't even know what race is becoming, because race is a concatenation, the network and entanglement of microbes, food practices, eating practices. It's how we eat and we're eaten, right? It's not an identity. It's a network of becoming with risks and occlusions and death, because the world and life is devastating. It's not some romantic quality. It's how the world worlds itself with shadows as well, right? So transraciality invites us to notice that when we frame identity as a stable structure or property owned by bodies, even with our best intentions to save minoritarian bodies, to bring them to a space of power, we're reiterating the structure of oppression. We're speaking with the cadence of incarceration. We're still on the same slave ship. Mm-hmm. Right. Let me stop there for now.
Yes, you really tied. You really brought it all around.
Did I tie it? Did I leave braiding together?
Beautifully, yes. Beautifully. And so I'm hearing a lot here of our need for seeing with new eyes or perceiving in new ways and breaking our attachment and our confinement to a very paradigmatic structure of declaring of the individual, of the separate. And that this is a huge thing that the Work That Reconnects invites us to, in its best, deepest, most effective moments. It is a process that brings us to kind of break our preconceived notions and begin to see things differently. And I feel like that's a reiterative cycle. It's like you have to keep doing that, keep going deeper, keep opening. And when, especially as we're talking in terms of decoloniality and transraciality, or our responses to systematic oppression, colonization, and these real experiences that we're having in our various different communities around the world, what I'm hearing is an invitation to just really keep coming back to the mat, coming back to, how do we see this beyond the previous confines? How do we allow the living world to move us in new ways?
The living world is always moving us. Yeah. Joe, let me ask you a question. How many times did you blink today?
I have no idea.
Exactly. So I don't think, except you're an ultra Virgo like I am.
Do you count your blinks?
And maybe you plan, you're like, I shall blink 1,000 times today on your to-do lists. No one does that, not even ultra Virgos. But we're always moved by the world. The world is, whiteness is, I could do the contemporarily relevant thing to do and relegate whiteness to an identity, right? I could say whiteness is a thing. And by thing, I mean it's a property of certain kinds of selves or bodies, right? That's a legitimate analysis to make. But heading down that way leads to troubling dead alleys and impasses. There's nowhere to go beyond that, right? It's just like having a conversation about the slave trade and how it is that the slavers, did the horrible, horrific things that they did. And your response is that they were evil. There's nothing else to do, right? If you stop at they were evil, right? Evil is some essence. And when we stop at the essential, then we've arrived at the transcendent, and there's nothing else to do with that conversation. But to stretch the threads of accountability further, to bring it into the immanent, into a field of immanence, is to notice that things don't pan out that way. That whiteness, for instance, is a field of acting, is real estate, right? It's how bodies, just like blackness convenes bodies, the hegemonic is a way of arranging bodies in order of proximity or in proximity to its notions of power, right? Nigeria is the blackest nation on earth, right? So there are more Black people in Nigeria than any other place in the world. It's the biggest Black nation on earth. And yet it is very white. By that, I mean, it is in its imaginations, in its aspirations, in its desires, right? As a Nigerian, I speak that we want to look like New York. We want to look like London. Our imagination of what the good life looks like is increasingly and has always been escalatingly moving closer to the visions that were given to us by those who colonized us, right? So whiteness is an apparatus, right? And it's a world-making apparatus, a terraforming principle, a machine. And what it wants to do is to keep on flattening the world to make home. It's a ritual, a place-making project to make home for the self. That's its fetish. The self is the fetish of white modernity, right? Our work is to help whiteness compost itself. And this is not a pathologization of whiteness, then. It's an invitation for whiteness to notice that it has always been connected, that its work of building the self is no longer as urgent, right, as it has imagined it to be. It's like telling Frigga that death is not all it's cut out to be. Let your son die, because in making him impervious to pain, you've made him impervious to pleasure. And that's what modernity is. It's an imperviousness to the motionings of the world around us. So I started out by saying that we are always moved by the world, like eddies of dust, like as Henry Bergson would put it. Like we're always moved by the world. The job of whiteness is to direct our attention away from the gifts of those movements, right? Right. It is to direct us away, it's to turn our gaze away from how we are actually supported, by microbes, by trees, by wind, by tables, by technology, and how we're used in the self-same moment we think we use the world around us. It is those places that crack us open that I think that a new politics can emerge from, right? And by that, I mean this, that if everything moves, Joe, then even whiteness is migrant. Even whiteness is changing. I absolutely refuse to think of whiteness as an evil, because immediately I think that I exalt whiteness. Right? Ironically, I stabilize it. Right. The work of the decolonial is to say, no, you too are part of the soil, and you also will die, and you also will become something else, like everything else becomes something else, right? This is what I call ontofugitivity. Like everything is spilling and becoming something else, right? So the work of our times is to notice those spaces, those sites of alternative power that is calling on our bodies, on our politics to become something different. And I think the clues for this is in those places that modernity does not want us to go to, those places it doesn't want us to go to, the shadows, madness, those places that it creates institutions around are where we should draw our attention to, right? How it, for instance, how modernity stabilizes or controls the wave-like effects of grieving is to create psychologists, right? How it shapes, how it seeks to create ramparts to block the migrant flows of these uncomfortable feelings, is to build is to create psychologists and wellness paradigms, right, that suggest to us that it is your right and it is your entitlement to be well and to be good. It is your right to be well, right? And in saying it is your right to be well, divorcing us from a world that is more than that, right? So our work, I feel, is to go to the places of cracking open urgencies, is to host the monster, right? The monster is a cultural technology. Every culture has monsters. We situate the monsters at the edges of our moralities. It is how we warn our children to behave well, to behave right. Like, this is what to do in this circumstance. If you do not, then you become like that, the dragons yonder, right? So we use monsters to frame moralities. And that's how settlement happens. That's how colonizing settlement happens. We need settlement, right? But there are moments when settlement starts to eat itself, when it becomes toxic, when it becomes closed, and it has nowhere else to go, when it eats the bodies of its minorities, and those bodies become indigestible, right? And yet it cannot do anything but eat and feed on those bodies. When it becomes cannibalistic, then we need a break. And that's where we call upon the agency of the trickster and the monster. The monster is the agency that opens up new paradigms with its agency. It claws with wounds. It opens us up to something different. So let me stop there for now. The monster is the treasure that our politics must focus on and must be magnetized by.
Beautiful. We're at the place in our time together where we might want to take a little break and shake it out. I was going to ask you a bit about empowered action and active hope and things that we talk about in the Work That Reconnects community, but I feel like you've spoken to it in all sorts of different ways. And so I'll just to wrap up our time here, just kind of inviting us to let all of this soak in and let these concepts break our preconceived notions, let them pull us into the cracks, and find new ways of acting, and being acted through, being guided by, surrendering our firm grip on us being in the driver's seat and letting earth move us, letting life move us.
Joe, I'm chuckling because I'm seeing some of the comments. Like,
Oh,
Trump
what
the
do we have?
monster. Let me quickly say this, that see, this is another thing about modernity and the ways
Oh,
that
I
we
see.
are gestating it within the city, habitual ways of perceiving the world. The monster isn't the bad guy. That's Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. That's Disney. That's Hollywood. The monster is not the bad guy. The monster is that which resists conformity, right? It's the archetypal entity that resists the ways that our bodies are framed, right? The monster is transversality, if you will, right? It's the shadow. It's the hidden conditions of our lives, right? If you've read the beautiful short story by Ursula Le Guin, it's the little child beneath the city, right? That is the very means for the city's existence and subsistence and prosperity, right? So I'm not talking about the bad guy. That's a morality that is also dying out, right? I'm speaking about the Le Guin story is the ones who walk away from Omelas, right? But the monster is that which upsets our frames of reference and invites a keening, a traveling, some kind of migrancy away from the concepts and the homes that we're used to. Okay. Monster is not bad guy. Monster is trickster at edges of the clearing.
Excellent. Important reframing. Thank you for the people who were writing in the chat to instigate that reframing, and thanks, Bayo, for catching it, and bringing our attention there. I'm going to invite us to take a super short break, about 5 minutes, so that we can take care of whatever biological needs we might have, and maybe even just like shake it up a little bit in there. And then if you've got some questions or things that you want to engage with Bayo around, you can think about those and frame them, and you'll be able to either ask verbally or put them in the chat. So let's all enjoy just a few moments to tend to our needs. Okay. Here we are coming back from our short break. I'm not sure. I'm kind of peeking to see. There's a lot of empty screens still. So we're going to start getting into some more open discussion, grab some comments and questions from the community here. But let's see. I want to just frame it as if you're called to ask a question or make a comment, you can raise your hand in that digital Zoom way by going down to the reactions button that's on your the bottom of your menu and pressing raise hand. So that's one option. The other option is to put a comment or a question in the chat. And we've got about 45 minutes, about 40 minutes, so that we can give ourselves time to close and say goodbye. So I know already that we're not going to get to all of it. And there's going to be way more than we could cover in that time. So I just want to let's let go of the need to get to all of it. We may or may not go in order. We're going to just see, what feels most relevant, and move in that way. So just, put it out there and see where we go here. And I guess, Bayo, is there anything that you want to say about this period of time?
No, let's do it. I'm excited to. This is the meaty part. Let's do it together.
Great. Okay, so we'll start with the brave soul who raised their hand, Kara. And
That's my sister.
oh, good. And you can unmute yourself. Sylvia, would you add her onto the spotlight? Oh,
I don't see her.
Hello,
where
Cara.
did?
Oh, I just unlowered my hand. I'll raise it again.
Oh, yeah. Raise it again, then we can see.
Yeah, so I can see you. There.
There. Okay.
Hands.
Great.
All right, I'll lower it. Brother Bayo, thank you. Such delight. Such excruciatingly precise, I have to say, as
Really?
always. So much gratitude. Your precision. And so that leads to the fork of both of my questions.
Right.
One about something that you and I have discussed in the past, the tyranny of accessibility, and this oppressiveness of how we define clarity in our world, and then that dovetailing into education, and this call for education globally that is, as we know, framed within a hyper-colonialist framework, a kind of a greenwashing or a humanitarian imperialist way of maintaining what we identify as equality, but is in fact, as we know, just maintaining modern civilization structures of various forms of oppression, interlocking oppression. So I'm curious, as you create new words, new languages, this morning I received a notice from an editor who once again was saying, you have to speak in clear language. This idea of clarity as basically a euphemism for Eurocentric erasure of otherness, of diverse ways of being in the world. So I'm curious, how do you contend with that? Here you are, there are 207 people in this grouping, and your language, you're using multiple kinds of languages simultaneously, which is the beauty and the precision, I would say, that offers us another way of looking at ourselves.
Mhm.
And there's a simultaneous silencing going on because you're speaking in a way that I'm sure many people are fearful of, not only because of the content, because you're using words that are unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar itself, we are trained from in utero is suspect. So that question, and of course, our mind-body split is the core of, I would say, of this dogma of clarity. And then that dovetailing into climate justice, answering, in Paul Hawkins' drawdown, the number one, I think, answer for drawdown was education, educating girls and women. And when, of course, education is based, it's rooted in electricity, which is then going to be part of all of those hegemonies of oppression with whether it's renewable or not, when we know renewable is not renewable energies. So how are you balancing those worlds, both of censorship, of difference, and then how that then becomes the answer to this almost seemingly totalizing horror of climate chaos and the result of how we've internalized these normalcies and seeing that the monster is other when we in fact are a collective monster.
Yes. That's the point of the monster, isn't it? To say that you're not as well put together as you think you are.
Yes.
Touch your stitches and feel the seams and see how you're put together. You're not coherent. The gift of the monster is to invite us to our own incoherence. And that's where emancipatory politics emerges from, right? Yes. It's the place of the crack, it's the place of a break that invites us to think differently. Okay. Well, I'll start off with clarity, my sister. I'm reminded of the phrase attributed to Galileo, "Eppur si muove," right? And yet it moves, right? This is a man who was standing, before an inquisition, and they were saying, recant, wanting him to dismiss his Copernican heliocentric universe model and insist on the church-sponsored geocentricity of the universe. And he's like, no, but the earth moves, right? The earth moves. Clarity becomes broken when that which is gazed upon moves away from the gaze of the gazer, right? And so clarity ends there because clarity doesn't know what to do. That's what data does too, right? Data is deeply anthropocentric, right? It feeds us. It tells us that this is the image of the world outside, right? And there's something about the world shifting and dancing away from that image, becoming a caricature that also removes the rug from under our feet, right? So poetry is the language of the apocalypse. I like to say, right?
Beautiful.
In times of crisis, when you settle on the precise and the molecular measurements, and you go into that epistemology, that way of gazing upon the world again, it risks re-territorializing us as central and the world as object to be saved. I think there's nothing more abusive to the world than our attempts to save it, right? To put it in the family way, to make it instrumental. And we hide that attempt unknowingly, ironically, paradoxically, underneath good sounding terms like sustainable development and all the hyphenated UN-sponsored concepts. You know them.
And equality, right?
And equality. These are algorithms secreted by the clearing, right? It's that justice can give me a seat at the table, but it will never teach me to play in the world outside of the building in which I'm told to sit in, right? Justice could not have attempted to address the situation of the 76 slaves that were stolen from Igbo land and taken to Dunbar Creek in Georgia, right? those Black men, women, and children, they didn't hold on to justice. Instead, they marched right into the waters and they started to chant their ancestral song. And they said, Amadioha, who brought us here, will take us back. And some speculative fabulation tells us that they became birds and they flew back to Africa. Of course, the colonial gaze was they died. And someone actually wrote that in his journal. They died, right? This is why Blackness is even the refusal of the linearity of history. That we can dance this way and that. This is poetry. Poetry is part of how the world comes to be. Poetry is not outside of the fact. Poetry is not supplemental to how the world. Art is the world, right? Mm-hmm. Speculation is the world, right? So I think that brings us to a place where we notice in the context of climate chaos that the data has brought us here, but data cannot take us beyond this. We're stuck. We need a different paradigm altogether to address this. And it would mean being seen by that which we've seen. It will mean subjecting ourselves to the world outside of our apparatus, right? And that is where something more than justice, more than systemic, more than human enters into the situation. Someone asked a while ago, so how does all of this translate into practice? Well, I don't know completely. If I knew, I would probably be a bird right now. But but the idea of the prophetic is to hint, is to lean towards the not yet available, not yet said. Perhaps there is a methodology and a politics that can allow us to sit in the places of openings and cracks, and to sit there and to serve each other. Maybe something meets us there, but I cannot tell you how we transform. No one can. This is life's imperative itself. I cannot tell you that a politics will nobly or totally embody all the aspects of our desire. I don't know how to do that. All I can do is to say there's a different direction, and we want to be in touch with the multiple alliances that we've missed out on building and cultivating agency with in our attempts to rush to a solution.
Yes.
I think I traipsed away from what I was supposed to answer, Karen.
Absolutely not. You're right there. You're traipsing around right in it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brother Brian.
Thank you. See you soon, Karen.
See you soon.
Great. Thank you, Kara. So we've got a question. We've got several questions in the chat. I want to pull one out from Tanya Mena. And Tanya, you are welcome to unmute yourself if you want to ask the question verbally. It was in regards to Black Lives Matter, and I could read it unless you want to come into this space and share it verbally.
Well, you can read it, and then I would like to come into the space.
Perfect. Okay. Do you see her, Sylvia? You can bring her in as a spotlight. So the question you put in the chat was, is the refrain Black Lives Matter the monster, and the echoes from the slave ships, those who made it to the land and those who live on the bottom of the sea?
And okay. Does my sister or auntie want to say something about that? Whoever asked the question?
I asked the question.
Okay.
I was curious because Black Lives Matter started as a United States refrain, but then became a global refrain.
Yeah.
And I just am wondering what your take is on it.
Take on that? Yeah. Right. Thank you, sister, auntie. It's interesting that a Nigerian American was one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. And during one of the heated protests in Nigeria last year that led to the killing by police brutality of many young people, and of course, many people in Lagos State in Nigeria, that refrain took on a new life, right? Black Lives Matter. So it emerges, well, let me dance with it this way. That Black Lives Matter is certainly not the monster. It is part of the moral establishment of living within settlement. Because the question behind Black Lives Matter is, matters to whom? Who do we want to be seen by? Without going into the history of identity politics, which I need, right? Especially when I'm coming to the United States. Oh, I need it. I suddenly realize how much I'm dependent upon the operations of identity politics. I need it to traverse the streets. I need it even as an African, right? Within my own settings, I need that framing. I need justice. I need to pay my bills. I need representation. I need to be seen, right? But there is a sense in which being seen comes with different risks, right? Because we now start to ask, being seen by what and by whom? Being recognized by what and by whom? Where do we seek recognition in? And what does this recognition enact that exceeds our expectations about how to live well? To put it differently, I've often said that I no longer feel I want to be, I want an equal piece of a carcinogenic pie, right? Mm. Or I want to have I want a seat on a table on the Titanic. I want to have a front row seat on the Titanic. I'm saying that there is a sense in which being seen by the nation state, being intelligible to systems of oppression, reinforces and rescribes the landscape of oppression, right? This is not to say that we don't need it, sister. I'm trying to speak with all the tensions, not all the tensions, some of the tensions available in speaking this way. That is to say, on one hand, that I do need the representation, the politics of representation that allows me to be seen, that allows me to pass through an airport and not be pulled aside for random search all the time, random becoming a choice that I'm becoming quite angry about. But at the same time, I want to notice that I cannot stop there, that there's a point in which critique quickly becomes part of an architecture of the critiqued, a department in the oppression that stabilizes my body, right? I need to go beyond the politics that just merely represents me, right? Because that is also the algorithm of modern civilization, to name me and stabilize me in a final way. What I'm hearing is the call of the trickster, is the call of Babalawos, is the call of an animist, pagan, Orisha-led spirituality that is saying, maybe it's time to travel. Maybe it's time to fly. Maybe it's time to become something different. Maybe it's time to shapeshift. And that is a different politics altogether, sister.
But
some maybe, yes.
But maybe the call actually has extended so that it's not just Black Lives Matter, because suddenly it was brown, and then it was yellow, and then it's red, and the spectrum becomes this lovely rainbow of these gradations of color and voices that are heard in a way that wasn't heard prior and wasn't united prior.
Right. I think what you're speaking to is the stuckness of our system. This is what I alluded to previously, that we don't know where to go, right? It's that what you say, Black Lives Matter, and I'm not fully available for these conversations in the United States, right? I offer a perspective outside of these Americocentrisms, but the perspective that I'm grounded in notices these tensions as symptoms of a system that wants to die, that cannot contain the moralizing effects of the individual. And so America, being the empire of individuals, is struggling with a hidden sickness, if you will. And I think that this illness is the crack in the hull of the slave ship. What do you do with it? Do we patch it up? Do we install justice? Do we have more Black people represented here? I dare say that having more Black people represented in an empire at the helm of the slave ship will not reduce the oppression in the slave ship. And so we need to fly, sister. I need it. I need to become something different. It's ironic I need Black Lives Matter. And at the same time, I wanted to walk me a certain distance and then let go of me and let me become something different that
Agreed.
is not available or intelligible to the nation state.
Agreed. And I believe that that crosses coasts and oceans and lands and
Yes.
becomes exactly what you say. Thank you.
Yes, sister. Thank you, sister.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tanya. Oh, great. We're going to go back to the hands that are raised. I see Shoto as your hand up, and you can unmute yourself and join us.
Okay, so this is great and the timing is good because now I can formulate questions. But I want to say, where to say, in the 1970s, we were in Cleveland, Ohio, we were starting a women's center, and there was an argument between those who wanted women to participate and those who wanted to wreck the society. Somebody snuck it in, and so it became the first kind, you know. It became we're not really changing anything, we're just getting women onto the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But you are speaking something that I've been fishing around. It's like the radical thing that needs to happen. And you said it a few times when you talked about monsters and when you talked about beyond the binary. And there's still something I can tell, but I'm going to say, I think you're really clear. I will have to listen to it again, and I don't know if my friends will understand it. But so then I came up with a tangible question. In the United States, we have an election coming up. And some of us...
Everyone in the world knows.
Yes, we all do.
We all know.
And some of us who know, it's like they're both awful, they're both disastrous, like you said about trashing the boat or making it survive, you're still in the slave ship.
Yeah.
But we're so afraid of what certain characters will do that we're investing, we're putting time, energy, and some of us money into that election to protect us from the total crash. And I wonder, I mean, my parents left Germany before the Nazis came, okay? But I'm real aware of what happened there. And I don't want myself or my children or my grandchildren to live under that. And I don't quite have an answer for what I would do then. And so I'm involved in the election to try to keep inconspicuous tyranny as opposed to open tyranny. What are your thoughts about that choice for, and I know it's not just the US, it's a lot of places.
Oh, yes. Open tyranny and inconspicuous tyranny. Yeah. What a choice. What a choice. Yes, but it again, it speaks to the poverty of our politics. I mean, a politics that is largely defined or embodied by an anorexic line snaking to a voting booth is too poor to hold the desires of a people, right? And it was once emblematic for emancipation and freedom, the voting booth, voting rights, the right to vote, right? Now I think the vote is now being upended by forces that are larger, agonistic forces that are larger than the individual, right? That is probably upending the very project of democracy, right? That you're a free, rational individual making your choice because you're informed. And now we're learning that we're not free, rational individuals. People will vote for someone because they ate breakfast in the morning or because a microbe told them to. You know, we've never been as free as we think we are. So,
well, and the votes aren't counted anyway. So
say that again. Say that again, Shoto.
And the votes aren't counted, and you know all these mechanisms to make a vote even more worthless. It was worth a little something, and now they're working on making it totally worthless.
It's the
But
logistics of the clearing, right? It's management, right? And I'm
yeah,
not saying that we will summarily arrive at a place where we'll finally be free, finally be intact, some kind of utopian arrangement. I'm a bit wary about and cautious about framing utopia. But I'm saying that this present arrangement needs a break, and it needs the inception of a different politics. We will not cultivate this politics unilaterally as humans. No conference will bring this politics together. No methodology or anything. It would have to be the alliance between us, our disabilities, and the gods. Why did I mention disabilities? Because the things we name as disabilities are openings. In the world I come from, disabilities are portals to other ways of being, right? They puncture the bubble of coherence. This is why a babalawo would often approach you with a knife to cut open your flesh as an act of healing. Terrifying to the modern mind, but that is the invitation of shapeshift. That until you address the places that are shadowy, until you touch those places and notice that they're not filled with nothing, wanting to be patched up together again, they're teeming with queer, strange life. Until you come to terms with the hidden zoospheres beneath the surface, you will continue to repeat the algorithms of the surface. So I guess this is just my way of saying, you're right, Shodo. We are inching towards proto-fascist arrangements. We're stuck in a politics that will produce choices that are not really choices, but just reflections of the impoverishment of our politics. And so at the same time, we want to say, yeah, vote if you want to. I'm not an anarchist in the sense that I would say don't vote. I don't think of morality in that way. I'm more an ethicist in terms of I'm looking for what morality cannot speak to, but that ethics is doing, right? Ethics being flow and morality being some kind of settlement. So I'm looking for what is unsaid, what is unthought, what is dangerous to say, because if someone doesn't stick in that place, we're all going to go around in circles, passing symptoms to one another, pretending we're having progress.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bayo. Thank you, Shodo. I want to go to a question now that was in the chat, and also Luis, who posted it in the chat, has their hand raised. So if you are able to turn your video on, we can bring you into the space. Great. Thanks, Sylvia. So what you put in the chat was asking about the connections between the trickster and grief, especially grief for the multiple crises and species extinction. Is there anything else you want to add to that before Bayo addresses it?
The trickster and grief. Yeah, I've just owned up to being a recovering psychologist, right?
Yeah.
And I confess every time that I gather with others, elders, wise people like you, that and I could tell stories about meeting grief as if for the first time when my father died when I was a teenager, and when we took him to his village. He was a man of importance to my country. So there were lots of people following the convoy of cars coming into the village and basically tearing their clothes and weeping. And I remember as this kid, I was really angry. I was angry about this because I felt they didn't know my dad. It was only when I started off as a younger academic, that I was introduced to the event of grief. That grieving, I was raised a city kid, so I was oblivious to these beautiful seminal, liminal practices. That grieving is not a private event, it is a public event. Right? It's not something we feel inside us, it is a calling. It is a calling to a place. And it's not even human, right? I think I would read grief through seasons, how seasons change, how leaves wilt and fall to the ground, that we need grief to transmute into new stages, into new ways of being. And maybe this is why Ishu, the trickster, is said to have traveled with the slaves, making the ship a sanctuary, a strange sanctuary across the transatlantic missions. In that way, I would say then that the trickster brings grief, but modernity, and I don't want to speak about modernity as if it's monolithic, right? As if it's a bad guy we should get rid of. That's not my saying here. But modernity seems to want to prevent us from feeling the full force of grief, right? The architecture around us, the city, algorithms, the way we eat, the way we visit the shopping mall, it seems these practices are built and processed over time to resist grieving. So there are no real spaces to grieve. We just get back into productivity. So we need grief sanctuaries. We need the, should I call it ab-therapeutic? I just made that word up right now, I think. Where ab is a prefix for away from, and therapy is therapy. We need the ab-therapeutic, that is away from the convening and converging lines and body-proofing mechanisms of therapy. Again, I'm not pathologizing therapy. I'm saying therapy has political effects, and that is to stabilize the self within a system that is intelligible. But to become unintelligible must be an ab-therapeutic gesture. I'm riffing here.
Can I add a quick comment?
Yes, please.
Yes.
So, or maybe a reframing of what I understood is that grief, in a way, allows us to travel through the cracks and to embody the trickster, or to, and to kind of get it back in. Wonderful. Thank you.
One of my dear brothers would say that the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, was a rite of passage, right? And the reason why the gods traveled with the slave ships and attended to that process, like their lives, their divine lives depended on it, was that they needed to make a sanctuary with grieving and to protect the preciousness of the creolized worlds that wanted to be born from that grieving. Without the grieving, Candomblé, Santeria, hip hop, all the worlds that came in the so-called New World would not have emerged, right? So we need a rite of passage. Modernity has its own ships pulling to its shores, and we must embark.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And jazz, yes.
And jazz and blues. And we're going to take one more question from Cindy, who's had her hand raised for a while. So Cindy, if you'd like to unmute, we'll bring you into the spotlight here.
Thank you. Maybe somebody else has a question, because mainly I don't have a question. I have thanks. I have just been so grateful. I haven't cried that much in a while, just the truth and beauty of what comes through, what you're riffing and everything that you say. It feels familiar. It feels like what I am seeing has now words for it and words beyond it, what life is about for me. So I've sensed profound love in and through what you've been sharing. I am very, very grateful to hear, what you said, and, to have this, to be in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama.
Incoherent as that is.
Thank you so much, Mama.
Do you feel we should take one more, or do you have some closing words that you'd like to?
No. I don't have closing. I'm just hungry. That's all. But I'm game for 2 more or 3 more. I'm here.
I think we maybe one more, maybe 2 more. Depends how long they are.
Yeah,
So let's see. Oh, Paul's got his hand raised, and you put something in the chat. So Paul Pulley, come join us in the main space here.
Hey there, Bayo.
Hey,
Great
brother.
to great to meet you in person. I've been following your work for a long time. I'm doing my own, throwing my hat in the ring and doing my own little bit to contribute, working on ecologizing masculinities. My question that I put in the post, which was really inspiring for me when you were talking about how important it is to get beyond the abstraction of race.
Yes.
And working in the gender space, gender and earth care space. I was curious to hear more about your thoughts in a similar vein of getting beyond the abstraction of gender for us to reawaken the ecological self. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I really appreciated the way that you spoke of race.
Oh, I'm convening an essay around this at this moment. I don't want to betray everything because I'm still processing a lot and sitting with it, and it's so juicy to explore. And it came from a question that's similar, and this is why I came alive when you talked about the ecologization of masculinity. But maybe there are a few things I would share around that. I'm really hesitant to jump forward because I don't want to speak it yet into being without just loving it behind the scenes and caressing it behind the scenes. Yes, again, this is the trap of the humanist assemblage, when we take the genderizing and racializing moves of the world, and we collapse it like a wave collapse function to a body that's supposed to hold everything, the unit, the citizen subject, right? But if we start to see masculinity as not a property, but as flows. Is Paul still there? He seems to be frozen. Oh, okay. You're perfectly still for a moment. Shockingly so. If we start to see
I'm listening intently, that's why.
Okay. If we start to see masculinity as more than human, right? And as what plants are doing, masculinity as a cartography instead of as a property, then it allows us to not just touch archetypal flows, but to release ourselves from a binary that is becoming also endangering and stultifying at the moment, right? Allow me to say only that about this subject, and to say more when I feel ready to do so. There's nothing unsafe to say, I guess. It's just that this question just recently visited me, and I was seemingly possessed by this question. And I started to, in this here journal, started to write furiously some of the things that I felt were coming through. And I want to go back to the sacredness of and the privacy of their invitation before I spill. So let's find some time to talk, brother.
Okay, I'd love that. And how will we find that publication once it comes out? Will you post it through this network? Or,
I would. It's an essay that I'm writing, and it's going to be on my website. Yes.
On your website. Okay, great. I'll look out for
it.
And just to say that I totally agree with you that getting beyond the binaries is really important. And the work that I'm doing is actually to go through the masculinities conversation in the same way that feminism has to get us to that place. And something that's been really helpful for me that I just flagged for yourself and others on the call is queer ecologies has been really helpful in this particular space because it basically creates space for all different types of beingness, not just who you sleep with or what gender identity, but actually beingness in a broader sense. And I found
it doesn't
really
limit
helpful.
it to the human. It doesn't limit it to human becomings. It makes it a matter of whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's microbial and bacterial. It's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your essay, man, and keep doing the beautiful work. I love tracking you. So
thank you, brother.
Awesome.
Thank you, brother.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. It looks like we have time maybe for one more. So I see.
I told you. I said we have time for one. I was telling you. There's always African time. There's always more time than you think there is.
Yes. So let's invite Juicy. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Juicy.
You got it correct. Yes.
Great.
Oh, I was thinking of the notorious B.I.G. when she said juicy. I'm sorry. If you get the reference.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a little bit of intentionality in there. It's
Oh,
like,
really?
yeah, because I've always admired the having another name thing. And so part of the reason why I have the name Juicy is because it is like my white girl version of a rapper name.
It works. It works.
Yeah,
I
it
thought
really suits.
Iggy immediately.
Yeah, it does lots of different things. It plays with archetype. It's very like embodiment of the trickster. So
Right.
I had a something about grief, and it came up for me. It's been something I've been working with for a long time, and the experience of one of the medicines I carry is teaching people how to feel very deeply, safely.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those pieces I work with a lot is grief, but also shame, and how those can actually be liberating in the experience of them.
Mm.
And what I've discovered, and I wanted you to speak to this about it. It's like what I've noticed over the last 10 years, that this has been like my primary focus, is that I can't help when I'm feeling an experience. It inevitably automatically bleeds into the collective. It starts sometimes as an individual seed because of the culture that we live in, and then it becomes overpowering, but it just bleeds into something that's beyond the self. And I've discovered that it's almost like the feelings are designed to do that as part of their innate nature. I wanted to know if you speak, because I love everything you share and everything you do. It's just allowed me to find a way of being that's been so empowering, because I've been on like probably like 10 sessions with you over the last 4 or 5 months, and I have spoken to you before. And so I just wanted you to, what I'm attempting to do, I think, is link the experience of healing and divorcing it or separating it from the, being well, or these concepts of like, of the Platonic ideal. Like I think about the ideal all the time. And then we're also in this individual culture. And so I'm finding a way to sort of bridge the individual experience of feelings or trauma into something that's more collective. So it's a bridge, that's an emergent bridge.
Thank you, my dear sister. I would invite you to look up Teresa Brennan. Teresa Brennan wrote the book, The Transmission of Affect. If you can, you could throw in there a little bit of Fernand Deligny. He wrote The Arachnean and Other Texts, if I recall the title. And I'm referring to some of their insights now. A while ago, there was, I think, 2 years ago, there was at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, a scientist studying, he had an interesting hypothesis that maybe humans are contributing just by breathing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Interesting hypothesis. And he had his tools to study the chemistry of the atmosphere. He found out summarily that that wasn't the case, that we're only contributing a very small, insignificant amount of CO2 just by breathing. But his dismissal of his hypothesis gave birth to a more interesting question, which was that what if our feelings are calibrated to certain chemical secretions into the environment? In a sense, what if feelings are atmospheric? Because he found out that the machines with which he measured the volatilomes, that's what they're called, the volatilomes, that is chemical assemblages in the atmosphere, right? The machines with which he measured them would go crazy when humans moved close to them, because we're balls of gas, right? And so they would pick up and be sensitive to the gases within our bodies, So he wanted to see if certain gases are secreted correlated to certain emotional states. And so he takes people into a theater and he spools air into one end of the theater and spools out and measures the secretions. And he plays certain scenes from a movie that is meant to instigate or, stimulate certain emotions. And then he measures what comes out on the other end. Long story short, he came to find that, and there's no sense of discovery in a final sense in science, right? But he leaned towards a heavy interpretation that, yes, indeed, despair is in the air, right? Joy is in the air, in a sense. Excitement is in the air. So that when we say these things, that something is in the air, when Phil Collins sang about something coming in the air tonight, there's a sense in which it was literal, right? And that we're only beginning to find out, right? So that you might almost say that we're not only in a pandemic of viruses, but we're probably in a pandemic of despair, that there's a sense in which distrust gains atmospheric qualities, right? So I'm learning to see that what my people say about grief being a public event, and in my son, who is on the spectrum, and I don't use that language in our house, that his disability is not his, right? It's an intensity, it's a field, it's irreducibly collective, right? It doesn't belong to him because it wraps us all in the moment with him, along with him, right? Of course, the effort to gain some kind of property ownership over states of despair or states of of hurt or something fits into the algorithm of modernity. But there's something else that, and that is noticing that, like you said, that there's some collective that is always present. Maybe this is why a Babalawo, who is a healer from the Yoruba traditions, maybe this is why when a client presents to him, he doesn't lean into the client. Yoruba healing is not client-centric. It doesn't privilege the subject sitting in front of the therapist. It is village-centric. There's always a calling in of the public. And this is why I say the healer in our traditions, in our pagan traditions, is simultaneously a priest and simultaneously a lawyer, right? There's always a collective in there. So when I speak about healing, Juicy, and I haven't said your name enough. I love the name Juicy. But when I speak about healing, there isn't some platonic, like you said, ideal to arrive at. You could think of healing as restoration, right? It is a rehabilitation to the familiar. It is how we restore images of the known. But there's another sense, a trickstery sense, much more dangerous, of healing as transmutation, as transatlantic migration, as travel. In that moment, it's not pleasant, but there is a sense of healing that invites us to die, to become part of a soup of imaginal cells, and to trust that something comes out of that situation of despair. Maybe this is what psychologists are now learning to refer to as post-traumatic growth. So I don't know that I've spoken to all the specificities that you've brought up, but I do think that there is a sense in which we are caught up in a notion of healing that reinforces the familiar, where we are being invited to lose our way. This is why my elders say, in order to find your way, you must lose it generously.
It's actually interesting. I call, and I've been calling it this for a decade, the type of work I do, emotional transmutation. And what I say is that when you do the emotional transmutation, it comes directly out of my experience of 15 years as a sex worker, and how like you're working with all this raw material in a collective and individual way. And so when I say is that what transmutation is that what needs to, like, you surrender the feelings and you let the feelings be the boss of you. And what needs to go goes, and what needs to change changes, and what needs to stay will often stay and solidify. And it comes the actual feelings do the work for you. It's just, I'm trying to really, I haven't really presented this work to the world in a broad way, but I've been, and what I've been waiting to have come to being is like the pieces that you share. I've been trying to like grapple with my individual state as a white woman in the United States, and like knowing that, feeling the calling of what you're saying, and like where is this bridge here when in the teaching of it.
Yes,
so this
it is
very helpful. Thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So it is hyphenating. It's until we learn to see ourselves as hyphenated, even emotionally, we will keep on being trapped in our silos of identity.
Right. Could you repeat the name of those authors? I saw them in the chat, but I just wanted to.
There is Fernand Delaney is an old, not alive at the moment, of course. If I could spell it out, let me type it in here so that you can see it. And I know we've gone into African time, and I'm so delighted that is the case. Fernand Delaney.
When I was a kid, I used to go to this Black church in my hometown. It was the Church of God in Christ, and they had a note at the bottom of every program, and it said, "Order and length of service will change due to inspiration of Holy Spirit." And I tried to live my whole life that way.
Yeah, we don't subscribe. We refuse the antics of homogeneous clock time. There are other temporalities hidden in the moment that are not measured by clock time. Yes.
Okay, thank you for typing that in. I'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Juicy. And thank you, Bayo. Oh my goodness, this has been juicy. It's been rich. It's been a great journey, and I hope you had a chance a little bit, Bayo, to peek into the chat and see all the love and kind of inspiration, and people are grabbing certain phrases and expressing certain things, and expressing a lot of gratitude and love for you and your generosity and sharing these thoughts and going on this journey with us. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna soak that
Thank you
in.
so much. Thank you for being here and for having me.
Yeah, such an honor, such a joy. It's just so much fun to get to spend some time with you in this way. And I want to share, I think Sylvia's putting in the chat, if anybody is interested in more offerings from the network, from the Work That Reconnects Network, there's a link there for our webinar and Conversation Cafe series. We also, there's a lot of thank yous coming in here too, so you might have to scroll up if you want to see what Sylvia's putting in. But I want to let everybody know that we're planning a Conversation Cafe on October 22nd. We don't have the registration set up for it yet, but it's going to be a follow-up to this webinar. And what we've been doing, we have the new Conversation Cafe series to create space for people to come into a more conversational setting and just really kind of explore some of the concepts that come up in our webinars. And we thought there was probably going to be a need for that after this one. So we've designated October 22nd for that, and we'll have registration put together soon for that. So just stay tuned in your emails. And then, Bayo, is there anything that you want to share with the group about what you're doing next, or what they might kind of want to tune into?
I don't usually do this, but I'm having a beautiful conversation with some of my friends about trauma, and there's going to be some dangerous braiding there as well. And it's hosted by Science and Non-Duality. It's October, so if you feel led to come, yes, let's do some more work together there. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Is it easy for you to grab a link that people could find out more about that?
I just put it there.
Oh, you found it.
Oh,
Okay.
I thought, sorry, I put it in I will put it again.
Okay. There's a lot of thank yous coming through.
Yeah.
The Collective Trauma Summit, is that what you're referencing, Bayo?
No.
Oh, because you're there too. Okay. Maybe it's another one. Yeah, well.
Okay.
You look there. Yeah. It looks like you.
You exceed yourself.
Maybe it's some other dude. Oh yeah, it's Science and Non-Duality. It's
Okay, check that out.
Okay.
Yes, it's called the wondrous winding way of the wound, something like that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure that many people are going to just be interested in learning more from you and finding more of the things that you've written and shared. And Bayo has just done many podcast interviews and teachings. And if you are hungry for more, just explore and find more of the offerings that he's given. Yeah. So just to close up here, just really want to thank everybody for being here and invite you to connect in more with the Work That Reconnects community through the Work That Reconnects Network website. And Sylvia, if you could pop that whole part there into the chat, there is a survey that you could fill out to just express anything that you want to express as a result of this webinar. If you have feedback for us as a network or for Bayo or for, just to share something that came out of this webinar for you, it is an anonymous survey, so you can just fill it out and not share who you are if you'd like, but if you want us to connect back with you, make sure that you put in your name and email so that we can do that. And that, I think, brings us to a close, and maybe time for a raucous goodbye.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And if you're able to stay on just for a moment afterwards, Bayo, just so that we can say thank you to you. But if everybody just wants to unmute and send some love to Bayo.
Thank you.
Bayo. Thank you, Bayo.
Mind exploding.
Thanks to your family.
Thank you, Bayo.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.